Righty-ho, welcome back to another episode of the Single Malt Review. As the temperature out here plummets rapidly towards zero, we've got a bit of a winter warmer and a heavily peated whiskey. What have you got for us, Dave?
Today we are off to Islay for a visit to Kilchoman. We have today a rather unique Islay whiskey. This one here was produced especially for Dramfest, which is the biannual Whisky Festival of New Zealand. Now, it says here, Dramfest 2011/2012. That's because there's slight ambiguity. Dramfest 2011 was going to happen, then our fine city of Christchurch was bombarded by a rather savage earthquake early in that year, and Dramfest was moved to 2012. This whisky helpfully notes the event by marking this Dramfest 2011/2012. The slight ambiguity is captured there. Anyway, what we have is a 5-year-old Kilchoman, rather old by Kilchoman standards, rather young by Scotch standards. A sherry matured, stonking great 60.5% alcohol by volume spirit.
It's been a few years since I've tasted this one. I did not pick up one of the Dramfest bottles myself, but
There are only 180 bottles in total, so it's something of a rarity, and you'd be hard-pressed to find one these days, I think.
I believe in its time it was the only, or at least it was the first, 100% sherry matured Kilchoman to be released to market, so it's interesting in that capacity. I think they have a more modern sherry cask now, but back then this was the very first look at a fully sherried Kilchoman. Although obviously it's been in for 5 years, it's not going to take on huge amounts of sherry character, but it will take on something. So it's a sort of a sneak peek into what a sherried Kilchoman might be in the future. Obviously, it's looking very, very light. Even at 5 years, I'd be hesitant to call this a first fill, just because of the pallor of the colour coming through. A first fill will take on a lot of its colour in the first year. So I'd say second or third fill on this one. So we won't.
This
be
one was
for
distilled 2006,
enormous.
which is only the second year in which Kilchoman Distillery was up and running. They opened in 2005, so it's a happy 10-year birthday to them this year.
No, we're still all waiting in dire anticipation for the Kilchoman 10 years old. That will be quite momentous when that comes out. We will finally get to see what Kilchoman is like as a fully mature whiskey in its own right. 10 years being just about the time when Islay whiskies really start coming into their own. The peated ones, anyway.
On the nose, it's immediately it's very peaty, but a kind of a sweet, even possibly salty peat, though. Not the heavy, dank, earthy peat.
It's fundamentally Islay peated whiskey that has got all of that marine quality to it, the seaweed, the fish and crustaceans and all of the good stuff that goes into peated Islay malt, but
not a heavy, earthy peat of, say,
it doesn't have the
Ardbeg.
tarry, ropey quality that an Ardbeg or a Lagavulin or it escapes me. It'll come back later.
Carl Ela.
Lafroig.
even.
That is probably the most archetypical of the very, very bituminous, if you're geologically minded, qualities that can come through on Islay malt. This is more in your fish food spectrum, if you want to get really dirty with your flavours, like I know Islay fans like to. There's a lot of organic sort of animal aromas coming through in here. And very, very oily. Lovely rounded flavour. There's a few fruits kind of underneath that, but I think it will need water for me to detect them.
Yes, having taken a sip of that just now, the immediate impression is of a strong, it's intensely peated and oily, with a flavour that reminds me of, say, sardines or even roll mops. A strong, sharp, oily fishiness. There is a hint of that sherry sweetness. It's trying to make its presence felt, but it's been just defeated by that peat.
Strangely, that's remarkably drinkable at full strength. It's not easy going, not by a long shot, but it's really quite a sweet whiskey at that full strength. I suspect what will happen, because I will add water to this, once I add water to this, the smoke will explode and it will become a manifestly more peaty experience than it is at the moment. It's a funny thing that happens, and to this day I do not know why the addition of water will really bring the smoke out of a whiskey, but just at full strength, almost overpowering as it is, those warmer, mellow, sweeter characters are coming through, and I can almost taste a bit of sort of stewed fruitiness, like a stewed peach, stewed apricot, but it's having real trouble coming in over the really, really salty, oily characters. So I will probably, conceivably stupidly, add quite a bit of water now to bring it down to something a bit more sane in terms of drinking strength, but
it's really at 60.5. That is pushing the limits of what is safely drinkable
on its
own.
That burns. There's no real way of skirting around that. That's getting to that stuff will hurt you. Drinking a lot of 60% whiskey, that really is very, very strong.
Now comes out the caramel and vanilla flavors. I say on the nose, smells.
I've probably brought mine down to closer to 40%, and the first thing that comes off is it's much, much drier. It's more of a sort of a smouldering driftwood kindling kind of a peat than this sort of seeping unctuous oiliness that was there before.
Well, it's never going to show up on camera. The texture now it's riddled with tiny threads and bubbles of oiliness, just a suspension of all kinds of little artifacts and impurities, all kinds of things that just speak about volumes of character and flavour that are going to come through once it actually hits the tongue.
The visimetric swirls, if you want to propagate that conspiracy, and it is a conspiracy, don't let them tell you it's a real word. I've heard the story. More on that another episode, I'm sure. Really, really, really quite dry now. I think I've added more water than Dave has, and I'm getting a very, very strong whack of almost coal tar, which now very few people will have smelled. It's only by the nature of my industry that I know what coal tar smells like, but those of you with slightly more extended years may have smelled coal tar, and it's not quite tar such you would find on the side of the road, but it's a distinctly petrochemical smell. I've entirely lost the fruit, but there is more vanilla and just a hint of honey coming through in with the vanilla. So the sweetness is still there, but it's manifestly changed.
Whereas for me, the experience has been totally different. I've added that water, and if I can slightly strain an analogy here, imagine pre-water, this whiskey was a briefcase full of documents. It was a briefcase all jumbled together, all the files all intermingled. Adding the water has taken those files out and put the documents in their individual folders. There is now a folder full of peat notes. That's still very clear, it's still very much there, it's in your face, it's unavoidable. But there's also a separate folder which is for fruit. There is apricot, there is dried apricots, dried apple.
I think that's a good analogy for really all whiskies. Whereas without the addition of water, particularly single casks, which are genuinely have no water in them, obviously whiskies that have been cut down to a certain strength, be it 46, 43 or 40, those will be far less reactive when you put the water in, because it's already happened. All of these flavour reactions have already taken place however long ago when it was blended together with the water and bottled. When you're dealing with single casks like this, you get a very genuine modification of the flavours, and as a rule, as Dave says, it's an unpacking of what was in there. You get spaces between the notes which let you better identify what's going on. There is absolutely a reason why professional tasters water their whiskey down to usually 14%, which seem insane for normal whiskey drinkers. That would be insipid, but it's the strength at which you can, with appropriate effort and analysis, tease out every single one of the flavours that are involved. And so that's what goes on for master blenders and people getting really serious about their back of the box tasting notes. They will water it all the way down, get things as spaced out as far as possible into all their various in trays, whereas a full strength, cask strength whiskey, everything's all packaged up at once, and though the flavours there are difficult to tease apart, they have tremendous strength because they all sing together, and so often that can be the greater experience. It just depends on the whiskey and on your personal taste. 60% is going to be simply too much alcohol for a great many number of people, and that would be entirely forgivable. You're drinking strong chemicals after all, and that's mighty, mighty strong. So it depends on personal taste, and it depends on the flavours you're really going for. Was I to assign a score, this probably would get an easy 7 from me, which, considering this is a 5-year-old whiskey, is a phenomenally good score. A whiskey that I will give a 7 to at 5 years old, goodness knows how good that's going to get once it reaches 12 or 20 or 30. So, not as high as other whiskies I will have rated, but think of the age. 5 years. It's a very, very good score.
For me, this whiskey is something on an anomaly and an enigma. Like, I've made no secret that I don't particularly like extremely peated whiskies, whereas this one is by its very nature extremely peated, but I still like it a lot. I've maintained that Kilchoman I will enjoy greatly when they have a 10, 12, 15-year-old expression, but that is at this stage not part of Kilchoman's plan. They're going to mix the flavours they like to create the whiskies they like, which is, admirable approach. It's unique and it's new, but I think the extra age would diminish some of that peat slightly, let the other woody characters develop. But all that aside, this whiskey is young, it's peaty, it's fresh, but I enjoy it greatly, and it's really complex. Now I'd have to rate it an 8 out of 10. Purely on flavour alone, it's a bit peaty and oily for my taste, but the complexity and the individuality it's got is what pushes it up higher. It is so expressive, it has so much going on, but still has a distinct, clear voice of its own, that, yes, 8 out of 10 from me.
High marks. No, Kilchoman, absolutely one to watch. As far as I know, it's difficult to keep up these days. Islay, I should say, Islay's youngest distillery, and monumentally craft-focused, for various reasons. Most of which in that they are a tiny, tiny team, so that craft is really all they've got going for them. They're never going to produce in gigantic volumes, they're never going to supply to blends. They are a single malt through and through, and they are by and large a single cask through and through. I think most of their whiskey has been released at cask strength or extremely close to it. So it's a craft whiskey for craft drinkers, and if you haven't taken a look at Kilchoman, I really, really would recommend it if you like your peated styles, because it's something else. Islay has a lot to offer, but Kilchoman really is its own thing in terms of a force of nature, I guess you could say. Talisker likes to say it's a force of nature. Kilchoman, I think, really is a force of nature in terms of the flavour that it brings. So do have a look. They do bring out something every now and then, and they're always usually really pretty damned high quality, and they won't cut you too hard on the prices either. They make whiskey to move, they don't make it to collect, so good on them for that. Either way, this has been the Single Malt Review. Do catch us next time, and we'll try to find something relevant to taste for you then. In the meantime, drink responsibly. Sláinte.